Hi, everyone. I think we're live now. How's it going? Hope everyone's having a really great Thursday. Quite a week, huh? It's been pretty interesting. And it's only going to get more interesting today. We're going to talk about some verified conditions, in particular the ROI of them, and ultimately how to make the case for building owners. So this is a great conversation if you're an AEC, whether you're an architect, engineer, or work in construction. Oftentimes, you're faced with answering RFPs, etc. And I'm sure many of you have experienced maybe the drawbacks of not having verified conditions early on a site. But we're going to jump right in. We're going to get to talking more about what verified conditions are, level set expectations for everyone, what we're talking about, and then we're going to share a pretty cool, I think, very helpful series of slides and takeaways that I think everyone's going to really enjoy and hopefully be very helpful in your own journey trying to help building owners know what they have, but also execute projects on time and on budget. So, as a bit of housekeeping, feel free to ask any questions along the way, whether you're joining us on YouTube or LinkedIn. We're going to reserve about 15 minutes, give or take, at the end of this conversation to go over those questions for you. So they'll hopefully populate here on the side for us. And I think Tyler will maybe help sift through and surface some of them. Please stay tuned to the end. We do have some very unique templates that we're going to be offering for free for everyone here. It's kind of our way of just giving back to the community and and sharing the lessons we've learned along the way back to help everyone. So with that, it's going to go over the agenda real quick. So at the start, we're just going to make some introductions. We're going to go over the background of integrated projects, just so everyone knows who we are, what we do a little bit. We're going to talk about why this matters, why verified conditions matters. We'll talk a little bit about the risk of bad data and things we've learned along the way there, and ultimately how to be able to work with us. And we'll do a Q&A. So as an introduction, hi, I'm George, here, head of product here at Integrated Projects. My background is in AEC, mostly on the technology side. And yeah, very excited to kind of get right in. Tyler.
Howdy, I'm Tyler. I'm head of our solutions here at Integrated Projects. So just like George, I come from the industry, so based here out of New York, licensed architect. And my whole career really has been around the intersection of design technology and the built environment, consulting for companies like SOM, KPF, Robert Stern, etc. So super excited. Not the sexiest topic, I would say, but we're going to try to do what we can to kind of spice it up.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty spicy. So to start with, right, the if you caught some of these before, this might seem hopefully well worn, but ultimately the real problem here in the industry in general is that there's 80% of the, let's say, building stock has outdated plans, and this is kind of the area that we really operate in with, right? So when we talk about verified conditions and the challenges that brings, it's the reality that a lot of people are dealing with this, right? So I'm sure you've faced some project where the owner didn't really have much of plans. Maybe it's a rolled up set of blueprints somewhere stored away in the basement that has mold on it, etc. We've heard so many different stories around the conditions of even these plans themselves. Sometimes they might not even have them at all, right? I mean, a lot of buildings are very old, and in intensive renovation projects, just even knowing what's even there is a really big challenge. And what we're presenting here is what we would determine to be the future of verification. How to make that simple, how to make that really easy for everyone in the community is really what we're all about. And it really starts by being able to capture a space. So what we offer is a set of services, one that we call Scan It, which is basically A to Z. So we go and mobilize on one of these devices or other devices, depending on the scope. And we then digitize that space and convert it into an asset that is very helpful for owners and for everyone on the project team. So whether you need let's say Revit model, CAD, that's all included, IFC, depending on where you are. Some of these file formats are really important. And we also offer and all that is to a set of standards, right? And then ultimately delivered through a platform that makes it very easy to bring it to your teams. Um, all this process is very easy. We simplify it into 3 steps. We also simplify the scope of work. Ultimately, we offer it as a kit of parts, almost, that you can kind of, or a menu of options you can add on as you need it to simplify the process of even getting something like a quote. As we mentioned before, we deliver all this in a very intuitive and easy to use platform that allows you to do very simple things, but powerful things, like being able to navigate models, 2D CAD plans, being able to see material or quantity counts, takeoffs of all the different elements that have been scanned in the building, and then ultimately being able to share this information out to the various stakeholders who need it, right? Not everybody has a Revit, has Revit software installed on their desktop, right? And so if you're trying to communicate with various stakeholders in a seamless way, being able to remove some of that friction is really critical. And again, all this is included in our services. Um, and we've done this a lot, right? We've done this over 5,000 times. And all the things we're going to be talking about is basically the lessons we've learned along the way. We've done it across a whole series of project sizes and types, everything from really small residential, small houses, all the way to very large infrastructure projects. And really, if you've been kind of tuning into what we've been talking about over time, you're probably already familiar that we are also applying AI and ML to this whole process, by which we're able to then take some of the things that we digitize, right, through reality capture, and turn that into these assets in an automated way, right, fully automated way. And we have a lot of really exciting things that are in the works on that front, which we're very excited to share with you. But for now, basically, the rest of this conversation is going to be around bad data. Tyler, tell us a little bit about bad data, and tell us a
I feel
little
like
bit about what we're seeing here.
I feel like that's the cliff notes to my entire career, basically. Um, no, I mean, I think everyone in the chat can probably resonate with, these are some pretty extreme examples, right? But I think we've all walked construction sites, or we have this brilliant design, this beautiful uh, disaster that happens because of bad data and bad information. And I think these are pretty comical, right? But there's like very real world consequences of bad data, right? So I think this kind of underlines the whole kind of thesis of why we're here today, and how to basically position the value of that bad data.
Yeah, I think it's important that it'd be really great if anybody has stories, and these are kind of extreme, comical, and maybe not necessarily related to things that came out of a consequence of measurement, but um, all this highlights is that building things is actually not easy. And I'm sure many of those that are watching have stories that they had major or minor issues where the lack of proper measurement up front led to bad outcomes, right? Led to, I think when Tyler and I were putting these images together, we were laughing quite a bit. Um, but I think that the main point here is ultimately, how do we start to minimize some of these things downstream? Now, the fact that all these examples got caught only at the very end is, insane. But we hear this all the time from folks who end up hiring us after they ran into these issues. So, yes, these are somewhat comical, but they do happen, maybe not in extreme scenarios like this, but definitely in costly scenarios, which we'll talk a bit more about.
Yeah, so I think probably everybody that's in the chat, and really what this webinar is kind of focused on and kind of addressing is is probably more on like the design side of things, architects and engineers, maybe construction managers, laser scanning professionals, right? But I feel like everyone here probably can sort of just intuit, right, the value of getting a scan to BIM and verifying the existing conditions. Generally, every architect or engineer kind of embraces these kind of new technologies nowadays because they really understand that there's tremendous downstream chaos that can be caused by missing or inaccurate site data. But the truth of the matter is that uh, you know architects and engineers really shouldn't actually be the ones that are providing or paying for scan to BIM services, right? I mean, even the AIA contracts themselves have no clauses in it that would protect that kind of liability, and really it should be on the owner of whatever project or facility to order surveys and order a scan to BIM. But believe it or not, the majority of folks that we interface with are not actually the ones that you know that own these property. And so where on the design side we see the benefits of scan to bin really in the like mitigation of risk and the alignment of project teams, and the dream of the single source of truth of BIM and all of that. But for a lot of owners, they just see a line item. It's an added cost. There's unclear value. It gets pretty technical. There's a lot of moving parts. And so with this, we're hoping to kind of help make this process of conveying the value and sort of framing the value proposition, return on investment, et cetera, to your owners. And I really believe that the demonstrating or pitching the return on investment for a service that's just part of your design workflow or your construction workflow. It's really not uh, you really shouldn't have to feel like you are kind of on your own to come up with the how to express the return on investment. And it's a very simple equation, right? It's like it's the final value that you have minus whatever you pay for the goods or service, divided by whatever you paid for the service. And that sounds like it should be really simple, but really, me and George have been thinking about return on investment a lot, especially in data capture and existing conditions over the past couple of months. And we have a lot of different edge cases, use cases, propositions, and I think really where it gets difficult is you want to be able to express numbers in like a math formula, right? But a lot of the return on investment really isn't always qualitative, right? Or isn't always quantitative. There's a lot of sort of qualitative, areas that we need to really be able to kind of describe and to pitch to the owners, even if we believe in the value, right? And I think just to kind of frame the entire conversation, it's really, it goes back to I'm sure everybody on the call is familiar with the McLeany curve, right? And especially as it relates to BIM. But honestly, this curve is on the x-axis is the impact on the cost or budget or design. And on the y-axis, the y-axis is impact, and on the x-axis is time. And what you can see from here is that basically at the very beginning of the project is when you can make design changes really easily with the most ability to impact the project. And as we go through, concept design, schematic design, construction documents, then into, pre-con and real world, installation and verification, even further into like commissioning and operations, it just gets more expensive, right? And so I think the way that I like to think about kind of framing this whole existing conditions or verification of conditions is really to think about it in terms of like an insurance premium. So owners don't really experience the cost of this bad data until it's kind of too late. And we get called in, quite often actually, when there's kind of a dire situation where we really, we should be educating our clients and our owners and owners reps to really budget for this at the very beginning of the project as a kind of insurance premium.
Yeah, on this note, I think um, what you just walked us through, this kind of um, the identification that there does exist a gap in perception from the AEC side for those that have to bear the consequences of working without accurate data when a project is started. They're looking at the world through that risk lens. Um, However, right, the owner is looking at it from what is this going to cost? What does the pro forma say, right? And what is then like the investment might look like after the fact? And we're that can be play out mostly in the commercial side, but you can factor that in that some sort of mental model like that exists in almost everything, right? Whether you're a homeowner and you're asking somebody to put an addition on your house or renovate your house, right? These concerns still prop up, and I think what we're saying here ultimately with this idea of the insurance premium is that we need to bridge that gap that exists. We need to bridge that gap, and the way we bridge it is by changing the conversation both internally to ourselves and the AEC side about how we even look at the problem, to how do we communicate that problem maybe more effectively or bridge the gap between this maybe more quantitative or sometimes qualitative aspect of ROI, and just figure that how to do that. One of the things that Tyler that you talked about, which I think is very interesting too, that and we struggle with in some sense, is that from the ROI side, so much of it is after the fact, right? We can look at things after the fact and say, oh, if we had done things, then that would have been really effective if we had done it right. And this ties into what you're seeing now here, which is what we call the regrettable conditions loop, right? So ideally, you avoid this with verified conditions. But when you don't have verified conditions, it's likely that your project team will enter this regrettable conditions loop. And we've seen it very time and time again. Basically, what happens is that the client might not have the education appropriate or might not understand um, the value of verified conditions, right? And so, well, what also exists in the industry is that many firms are not really well set up from a, and I'll just be frank, right? Not set up from a marketing perspective, right? They're not set up from even this idea of like business development sometimes is not framed from the perspective of how do we educate the client about a process more clearly or more explicitly. Sometimes it's very almost like order taking, right? Oh, we need to do this. Sure, we can do that. As opposed to, hey, we should probably educate you on the benefits of this process. And even going so deep, and we've talked about this a little bit here about the lack of maybe even process design in the industry, the lack of looking at clients and their experience in the whole, let's say, the buying journey, right, in relation to these firms is very weak, right? It's not invested in. It's just not. The industry does not necessarily, as a whole, really spend a lot of time and attention on that, and that's for many different reasons. But what the consequence of that in this regrettable loop is that then you end up this moment where the let's say a construction firm or an architecture firm doesn't add that as a line item in their in their RFP response. So they don't add that as a line item, and then they recognize because they might anticipate that the owner might have something to work with, etc. Just they don't, right? And then at some point, there's a recognition after the award's been given and in the project that started, like, oh, we probably need this, right? And I'm sure if this were an auditorium, I'd see a lot of shaking, nodding heads. Yes, this
Yeah,
happens.
I'd be curious if anybody has found themselves kind of caught in this regrettable conditions loop.
Yeah.
I know I certainly have.
And so then what happens is then you go back to the client and you say, hey, we actually probably need this since you didn't have that. And then the client's like, well, that wasn't part of the initial, that I wasn't expecting that. Or they, and either they reject it or maybe they begrudgingly approve it. But now there's a point of friction. Um, and what then ends up happening if they don't do it is that all the things that you could have foreseen might have gone wrong, maybe do go wrong, maybe even a small percentage of them go wrong, but something does go wrong. And so the idea here is how to get out of or how to avoid entering this regrettable conditions loop is by educating clients on what verified conditions are. And that's what we're going to help you with ultimately here in this conversation. And because ultimately they're going to pay for it at some point, right? And I think the way we start to use language is very critical here. Now, you heard me say a little bit about how firms in general don't have, like, let's say a really well fleshed out marketing / business development motion, meaning like they don't really use education as a really powerful tool to get buy-in from clients early on. And so what happens there is that the language that's used can either be on the verge of very almost too technical, maybe sometimes not technical enough, but oftentimes it might be more technical than it should be. And so one part of this conversation we're having today is, in the assets that we'll provide, is also a way to enter conversations in a way that's a bit more about the benefit of what these things do versus the technical side of what they might be. And so we want to move away from, let's say, talking about these things, even when we talk about education, as what this is, meaning like, we're going to include existing conditions as part of the deliverable, right? I don't know what existing conditions, that language is could be foreign to them. They might not understand that. Or you'll receive a point cloud and a LOD 300 error model. Now, obviously, as integrated projects, we do that because our main, the people that we need to address ultimately ask those very technical questions. But from the building owner side, you have to use very different language. You have to say something like, you're going to get a ready to use site model that's going to enable a lot of the whole project team to make decisions faster, right? Or if they say if you say something like survey costs are included in the estimate, again, I don't know what a survey, I might have an idea of what a survey is, but surveys, we know in this industry, has a lot of different meanings, and it's at the different scales, and it can be everything from a plot of land to like the actual dimensions of a building. And so again, like the words are almost not explicit enough sometimes. And so, and as opposed to saying that, just say, we've allocated time and budget to protect your timeline and reduce change orders. Because sometimes ultimately what you just need to enter in the conversation is more about what's in it for them, as opposed to, hey, this is this line item and, et cetera. Because again, what happens is that if it's not well positioned enough, even though you understand the value of it, if you're not framing it from the very get-go, then they might just see it as like an expense that can be taken off. And at worst, maybe you're not able to defend it when that question does come up, and you say, sure, we can maybe get by, et cetera, only because you want to get, you don't want to seem like you're difficult to work with, or whatever, any of those kind of other psychological elements. But really, you should be very confident in your position. Like, hey, I know this might seem like an extra line item, but actually these are the benefits that you get from there. And then, just to even just belabor the point here, is the regrettable conditions do exist, and they're probably something you've experienced, right? It's either rework due to misaligned walls or missing MEP data, or it could be, redesigns that happen after construction begins. I'm sure you have some examples you can fill in either LinkedIn or YouTube, wherever you're at. And ultimately it could lead to change orders, right, that surprise everyone. And we've heard it. I mean, we've heard everything. We might talk about some more examples, but we've heard things from just like huge steel structural elements that just like don't ultimately fit after they've been prefabricated offsite or something to that degree, right? We've heard all these different instances where just things do not line up at the end of the day, and you need to, all this stuff could have probably been mitigated at the very beginning. So yeah, maybe Tyler, you can tell us a little bit more about, how can we start framing this from the perspective of the client, and how can we start to talk to them in terms that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's really important to know. I think everybody probably understands that buildings are only getting more complicated, and schedules are only getting more and more um, expedited, right? I mean, we've got some pretty challenging and complicated buildings, and of course, if budgets are shrinking and all of that, um, just the kind of complexity that we need to coordinate, right? Somehow we need to be able to frame why this matters to a client's bottom line and an owner's bottom line. I'm an architect. I come from the design industry, right? And so I'm always very um, concerned with, I guess, my own heuristics as far as why I would want to get existing conditions at the beginning of the project and avoid rework and all of that. From the client's point of view or an owner's point of view, those types of benefits may not actually really resonate with them, right? So I think to go back to this idea of like the insurance premium, right? We need to be able to quantify that owners care about time, money, and outcomes. So we need to be able to, kind of frame this not in terms of, technicalities of LOD and things like that, but what really does avoiding surprises and mitigating risk mean to the bottom line, right? What's the cost of a good night's sleep, and liability? Um, Oh wow, Sheena has a great wow. Sheena has a great regrettable condition in the chat here. Um, yeah, I encourage anybody else that if you've got more stories like this, please add them to the chat. Always looking for more. But yeah, we need to be able to kind of talk about the budget. How can we actually control the budget? And how can we provide early clarity into what that budgeting actually means? And then, of course, what's the certainty in terms of the amount of fewer unknowns that we have going in on the AEC side of things. Really, the faster the progress we can make decisions, and we can ultimately deliver projects faster, right? Um, and then, really, the last one that I think maybe not a lot of us, think about, but I think is really important, is how do you actually use new technologies, existing conditions, and um, kind of bring this kind of value to your clients to build trust and credibility, to position yourself really as a strategic vendor or a strategic partner, and not just simply a vendor. So we have a number of goodies here that we bring along with each webinar, and we'll continue to do that to really help you in all aspects of verifying conditions, right? But um, without a survey, there's definitely very well established kind of researched industry standards, and they're often expressed. You'll hear it in the BIM world, and you'll hear it in the scanning world as what's the unit, and oftentimes they're expressions of an RFI. And I think the reason why it's an RFI is because the RFI has a direct sort of lineage, right? Where an RFI can become a change order, it can escalate into a construction change directive. That can, hopefully not go into arbitration, right? That ultimately goes into litigation. So by eliminating as many RFIs, you're literally not even inviting that whole process of liability into the project. And I mean, it's pretty interesting. We do have some hard facts and some hard figures in some of the goodies that we're going to give to you just here in a moment. But I mean, even to quantify the cost of an RFI, right? On average, it's about $2,000 just internally for the administration and coordination of an RFI. Not even the downstream, consequences if that actually, produces delays in a schedule or, actually hits like a budgetary item. So yeah, so you'll see that that's definitely a unit that's very often kind of used. And with with surveys, with scan to BIM, there's a drastic reduction in those RFIs. And really, okay, there is an extra line item for the site scan, but that site scan budget is really your risk premium against a much larger kind of order of magnitude that can happen in construction projects. Further to that, right, without a survey and without existing conditions, there's really ambiguous assumptions that are made about the project up front, which has downstream consequences on just floating contingency in your RFPs or your contracts. Every trade, if they don't have a very clear scope, is going to pack on more and more contingency, right? So if we do with the survey, with this insurance premium, right, we can have much clearer scopes. Everybody can be aligned on the same page at the very beginning of the project, with cleaner budget breakdowns and ultimately more accurate pricing from construction and construction sub trades. So we like to say a good survey costs thousands of dollars, but mistakes cost millions. And just to kind of put this into perspective, right, if we go back to that McLeany curve that we were talking about, the further down the project schedule, when we have resubmissions for the design or resubmissions because of permitting, or we have RFIs and submittals and all of that during construction, all of that just gets more and more expensive, both in terms of time and money, the further the project goes down the line. So really, I think everybody can probably. Oh, I want to. I think I really want to read Sheena's comment there on the chat. Maybe I'll pull it up a little bit later, but yeah, we can have faster progress in decision making in every part of this process, with fewer unknowns that we can have. And ultimately, this is really about positioning us as AEC professionals as a strategic advisor, right? So the kind of task executor is just going to really stick directly with what the owner has been has asked us to do, or what's inside the RFP. Problem solver, we can kind of flag risks early, but as a strategic advisor, we shape the project's direction. And I think we really if we understand and we intuit the value of these downstream consequences, and we're able to communicate that to owners, then I think that'll do nothing but strengthen our relationship with them. So I can definitely say that clients notice when we're proactive and we bring in risk to ultimately reduce the risk on their side. George, you have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think this is it's like we like to talk in meta points sometimes about more of the mindset that we need to have in general, in this perspective of being given an RFP and just saying, okay, we're going to stick to just responding to the RFP on its terms. In some sense, I think doesn't necessarily help you stand out. One, and I think and it's not just to stand out for the sake of standing out. It's really that you want to be seen as someone ultimately that is helping to, like we said, right, craft the direction of the project, or really seen as someone critical to the success beyond the costs. And I think like this is obviously maybe the penultimate challenge, right? In general, is like, how do you communicate value? And I think part of that is by surfacing up the potential downside of things. more so, and obviously having some solutions here and there for that, but being more rigorous about helping people understand what they may or may not know, even if you were to lose the RFP. And I think this is kind of very critical. Like you rather it's much preferable to be known as like the firm organization that's providing realistic advice to people than necessarily one that is just trying to meet them on a cost basis. And I know that the reality is that things are tough and you have to try to push down. Costs are still very tantamount to people, but I think oftentimes if we go back to this idea, um, whether it's like you'll pay for it eventually, or whether you pay for it now, you're definitely pay for it more later. I think all those framings are really helpful. So yeah, I think this is just more of a maybe meta point for everyone. But we want to help everybody start from something, right? And so what we've done is we put together a modest, but we'll definitely be adding to this over time, but a list about 9 different common objections that you might receive for scan to BIM in general early on. And I'll switch over now to kind of just highlight a little bit of it. One second.
Yeah, and
So
I'll also say that with every one of these webinars, we're putting together useful handouts or cheat sheets or things like this. And I think this is probably the first of many kind of dives into return on investment. If anybody has anecdotes and wants to drop it into the chat, I saw Sheena's here. This is a really great comment. And one thing that we are going to be actively doing is basically building up a kind of library, right? A repository of what we've seen in the industry, but also, we want to hear from you guys. So like, yeah, Sheena, definitely interested to connect with you on this and, kind of provide, a survey, right? Of, of the value of this part of all of our projects. Sorry, George.
No, no. I mean, yeah, this is you're saying that I just kept on thinking about the word like open source in some sense. Like at the end of the day, um, when you download this, you read through it. If there are things you think that are missing in there, please reach out, let us know. We want to keep adding to this. We'll definitely put your name on it as it came from you. Um, and again, it's like if we don't, if as an industry we don't do this right, then what will happen is that we'll continue to enter the regrettable conditions loop on projects, because it takes a team effort, an industry-wide effort in some sense. Not saying we need like standards. I'm just saying that we need even like less formal than that, just a more consolidated effort to just help people understand that if that the consequences of not doing this, right? Because I don't think there's anyone, mostly, probably there's always bad actors, but I think for the most part, people do care about putting together great projects, right? They want to see projects succeed. They want to hit a goal that they've been given. And I think if we take those, we lean into that and we just try to surface these things up, I think it rise all right. It's a rising tide for everyone, right? It hopefully lifts all boats so that we can actually hit some of the things that we're talking about. So to just kind of go over real quick some of these questions, you know, question number, really critical one, right? It's like, can we just use the original drawings from when the building was built? And so what we've done is provided, like, let's say templated responses just as a starting point, right? Feel free to like dump this into chat GPT and like add your own like flavor to it and remix it. But it's just more to help folks from the perspective of whoever's using this, right? So if this question is being asked of you and you're an architect, right, we've added the architect's POV. And so in this sense, you're kind of just very clearly explaining why things have changed, right? And again, using language that's intuitive, that's understandable, that's very, very helpful for an owner to understand. So, in theory, yes, but in practice, most existing drawings are out of date. Buildings evolve, walls are moved, systems are rerouted, renovations happen without documentation. I think just this language alone is helpful. And so we wanted to, put this together in a way that was very condensed and easy for everyone to pick up on. Um,
Yeah,
I think some other ones.
George, that kind of reminds me, because here at Integrated Projects, we have we have a firm kind of philosophy about how we go about building our models, and that's built off of just point clouds, right? Because we can trust point clouds, and then by extension, we can provide that trust, right, to our clients. The minute that, I remember, back when I was working on construction documents, and I got an um, as built model, and as soon as I would find just one portion of the model or the documentation that was off, all of a sudden I couldn't have confidence in the rest of the documentation that was given to us. So we actually have a lot of architects and engineers that will come to us, and they'll say, we've got as builds, can we give that to you and have you build off of that? And we'll take them for sure, and we'll reference them, especially if we can't visually see something in the point cloud. But oftentimes, right, if all we're doing at that point, from converting, let's say, an outdated PDF into a BIM model, is now we just have an outdated BIM model. Right? So yeah, so it's kind of an interesting kind of first principle that guides us for sure.
Yeah. And so we encourage you to, take a look at these questions. Feel free to give us feedback. I'm going to switch over back to the next series of things that we're going to share with you. So, yeah, there's the QR code. Feel free to download it. I saw there's some questions here. Paul, I know there might be some buffering. Hopefully, it's not, we're not coming in choppy for everyone. Um, and then Greg, do you guys mind if yes, feel free to use some of these, and, attribute back to this would be great. If you have anything that you'd like to add to it that we can add to this, that would be awesome as well. Really appreciate that. Okay, and I think the other one here we're very excited about is presentation slides. Do you want to show off some of this here? Let's go in. Let's do it.
Yeah. So one thing that I know, when I was an architect, well, I'm an architect, but when I was working, in kind of corporate architecture, was whenever I would try to convince someone to do a scan to BIM, I never really had a good way. I never had, a pitch deck and all this stuff, right? And I'm basically just way too busy working on, architecture related practices. So what we thought we would do for this one, and again, this is just going to be the kind of first of many assets that we'll be developing inside of this kind of library of case studies and industry surveys, things like this. But we wanted to give you guys some kind of like open source slides, right? Of feel free to download these. We have a QR code. I think we'll also drop in links in the chat as well. But you'll notice that, yeah, this is for sure utilizing a lot of our branding, but we're giving you the native files here, so you can brand it on your own, change the language, anything like that. But at least you've got something where, if you've got a presentation and you're doing kind of pitch to an owner, or going out to bid or something like this, and you just needed a couple of quick slides to throw in to make the case for scan to BIM. We're just trying to make that really easy here. So the old way, right, unverified existing documentations, and the new way. We're trying to focus really on the things that we have found that resonates with building owners and operators, asset managers, etc. Right. So some of this is kind of a regurgitation already of what we presented before, but time, budget, and risk, right? In addition to that, a lot of building owners, they may not really understand what scanning is, how it works, right? So we're trying to use very non-technical language to get verified conditions and a 360 virtual tour, mobilize within 5 days. Now, that could be your construction company that owns the scanning device. It could be us, it could be another laser scanning professional, right? Scan up to 200,000 square feet a day. In this case, we are featuring the Navis VLX, but swap it in for whatever hardware that you guys are using. And then really, how does this get converted to CAD? What can you do with it? Things like the quantity takeoffs of verified conditions, different things like that. And then to kind of round this out is, when you're trying to make the pitch for them to put that line item in, you really want to be able to make sure that they understand what will happen when they skip verified conditions. On the design side, you're going to have way more, resubmissions. You're going to have way more RFIs during pre-construction. You're going to have a lot of delayed submittals. In some cases, we've seen pretty extreme situations, right? Where like we didn't, some projects don't even know like the type of structure that the structural system, right? They thought it was a concrete building. It turns out that it's a complete steel building. I've seen a lot of cases like this, right? And so obviously the construction schedule gets pushed, or maybe it even recirculates back into design. I feel like we've all been in this kind of loop many times. And from an owner's perspective, time is money, right? So when you skip the survey, your whole schedule compresses. And as fate would have it, it's always at the worst possible moment, just as you're trying to close out the project. And then just the risk of bad data, right? Think about unverified, inaccurate, non-existing conditions, as-built drawings as a really high risk kind of situation. In some cases, maybe it's not so bad, but in other cases where, even if a column is off by 10 inches and you're trying to do space planning, right, over a, let's say, a 20,000 square foot building, I mean, that could be the difference between, 50 to 100 desks or, spaces that you're trying to put into an office. So there's real world, ramifications for these things. And if you compare that to just like the cost of just getting accurate existing conditions, all of a sudden that line item, starts to look like a drop in the bucket. And yeah, where we're going, accurate as-builts in one-dimensional data, two-dimensional data, three-dimensional data, and really position it as an insurance premium and a project accelerant for the owner. And the last two slides is really just talking, keeping it very high level from an ROI perspective. We kind of there's a whole host of use cases. I actually George thinks that I'm a little bit crazy because I put together I think 20 different use cases of what an owner could do. Everything.
Yeah, it's a little too much.
Everything from due diligence and acquisition confidence, all the way down to like digital twins and sensor monitors and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, we're really just trying to keep it really really high level, at least for now. Definitely very interested in your feedback as well. But just making it really easy for you guys to slip this into a pitch for you, pitch deck. And then here's another one, right? Is just faster, more cost-effective renovations. Reduced rework, errors and omissions, accelerated project timelines, enhanced collaboration across all stakeholder teams, risk mitigation. So hopefully with this stuff, and yeah, we're definitely very interested in your feedback. This will make it really easy for you to kind of make the case for this line item on your projects.
Yeah, and again, I think to reiterate, even the way the presentation you just saw, this series of slides is structured, is really meant to tell that kind of story from the beginning about what is it? What are we even talking about? To like, what does it entail, right? So what is scanning? What is, because sometimes we just can't take it as an assumption. We can't assume that people know what we're talking about when we use these words. We know it because we're in the industry. We're like, we see it here in front of our face. But I think the hope is that by providing this type of language, some of these assets that you can use and insert in your presentations, that it will, ultimately help you teach, right, and help you educate the client. And so yeah, feel free to, as part of this, what this is, this asset itself is a series of PowerPoint slides. So with the links that we'll provide, you'll be able to access this PowerPoint slide and then just kind of drop it into your own presentations, whether that's in the front. You can pick and choose what you want to add, right? And even put this as an appendix if necessary. So yeah, just really excited for the kind of feedback we're going to get on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll add here. Actually, I forgot what I was going to add. Never mind. Sorry, George. It'll come back.
We'll keep adding. We'll keep adding. But yeah, just now we're entering the stretch here. Yeah, we've done this type of work for a lot of different companies as well. If you need, if you yourself feel like you need a partner to help kind of come with you to a client presentation, we can most certainly do that and help educate clients on your behalf. Yeah, we're very game for anything like that, right? And so however we can be most helpful, right? That is what we're here for. And so we've been very helpful for different folks in different companies. We want to help you fast track your projects. And so myself, definitely Tyler and Jose, the CEO, we're here, right? We're here. So feel free to book a time with us. We can talk more in depth about an upcoming project you might have and how can we together frame it in the best way possible such that we can educate a client upfront and have them avoid going into the regrettable conditions loop that we've all
Yeah,
experienced.
so George, you jogged my memory, and in fact, you basically went in the direction that I was going to go in. We're giving you sort of, I guess more generic ways about, framing the conversation with owners and, some statistics and things like that. The return on investment really gets down to the granularity of the project at hand and the use case at hand. If you have a project, that you want to make the pitch for, lean on us to help come up with that story and that return on investment. And yeah, super happy to do that. Both on the sort of acquisition side for projects, but also even if we've completed a scan together, a construction project, it'd be fantastic to do case studies and really build up a kind of library of all of these use cases.
And so with that, let's see if we can maybe tackle some of these questions that kind of piled up and see what's cooking. So I definitely want to talk. You should totally have Sheena on one of these. But yeah, that's pretty nuts, Sheena, having a project, having to do a whole redesign after they did the existing conditions way late. That is that's what we're talking about. That's pretty insane. Yeah, that's crazy.
George, we should host an industry competition on who has the worst story.
Extra points if you have pictures, because it's actually hard to find. And I'm sure it's probably easier on the residential side to find some of these mishaps. Much harder to find photographic evidence of them on much larger projects. But I'm sure they exist, and obviously we keep them anonymous, but to spare the names and faces of the stories involved. But yeah, I mean, maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the projects you've seen, Tyler, that is kind of.
Yeah, one thing that we are definitely actively going to try to do in the next couple quarters is be much more public about case studies and marketing related materials to telling these stories, because we have some pretty insane ones. I think a lot of them are difficult to get public client release, right? But we can definitely talk about some of these use cases. Actually, but before I go into there, Robert has kind of an interesting question about using AI to speed up the creation of BIM models. George, you want to jump on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and we can follow up as well. But we've, in essence, what we've done is, because we've done so many projects, we have been able to build an ML model that can take these point clouds and turn them into Revit models. And along the way, it also does really nifty things like be able to segment these models. And so I think many folks probably saw that Recap just launched a new version for Recap 2026, which offers some let's say some point to mesh capabilities, and maybe some utilization, some tools to be able to help filter out certain elements, etc. Well, what we've done is now we have already segmented recap files that we can now deliver. And so it's really powerful because we can get down to about 16 different categories at the moment. We have plans to increase that significantly. And this year, we hope we have a clear line of sight to get to like MEP. And I think in aggregate, what we're trying to do is basically provide a very intuitive way to be able to get these type of existing conditions done faster, and a very intuitive way to also get any other types of insights. And so, in the last time we were here, we talked a little bit about Fast Track, a new kind of delivery process that we have now, whereby we give you different assets along the way in a project. And so, and these assets are designed to answer critical questions as you would need them during a project, and just to be able to move things forward along, because there's still time that takes right now between getting that point cloud and turning it into, let's say, the more high resolution fully QA/QC'd Revit model or 3D model. And so with that whole process, we just want to make it much simpler. And with First Draft, which is the whole pipeline that we talked about, that automates it, we see a lot of potential there to just be able to provide these answers very, very quickly. One of the things that we can do now is provide levels and grids, for example, within about a 48-hour turnaround or faster, right after we have like the point cloud ready. And again, these things are just going to only compress further and further because we keep just iterating on the process, right? So same way that ChatGPT, when it first came out, had a certain constraints to it, but now it's pretty mind-blowing. We are very excited because we feel like we can go on that same nonlinear trajectory with what we're doing. So we can dive more deeply. Robert, would actually be really cool to maybe give you and your team a more in-depth presentation on, and maybe more behind the scenes, and bring in some of our ML team as well. All right, I think that's it. And let's see. Someone asked if this was live. You are live. We're just we'll probably get back to all of these different answers after the fact. It's kind of hard to juggle both the response at the same time.
Well, no, I really appreciate everyone, for taking their lunchtime with us. And don't worry, we're not neglecting anybody in the chat. We'll definitely follow up after this.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week and great weekend. See you next time. Cheers.
Cheers.